the question you ask is it becoming the issue that in third world countries or in Africa, we just vote for people who eventually get dictated to by the IMF, the World Bank, and that's also causing much more mistrust in whoever we are voting for, because it's more of the people we are voting for don't have the final say. Those who really have the final say, we don't get to vote for them. And is that creating more mistrust within the states that we are living in, Felix? So, thanks for staying with us. This has been the Shaft podcast discussion on the happenings in Kenya. I've been having this conversation with three amazing individuals. Nyabuto Nyachio, who is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, Paul Kituyi, who is a law student and also a debate enthusiast, and then Michelle Adika, who is a senior editor of the Strathmore Law Review Journal. And so the conversations have been around the Kenyan protests. Well, that's where we started from. We went on to the high debt ratio that exists in Kenya, which is essentially what led to the finance bill that instigated or incited the protest to begin with. In this part, we want to go a little bit more onto the democracy aspect and the governance aspect of Kenya. I asked the question in the first part about why the protest evolved from calling for the withdrawal of the finance bill to demanding that the president steps down. And that the calls or the tones and the demands of protest and the reasons why they change really signal exactly the way in which people perceive the structures of that country. It's not just that people get up and start making demands on protests. It's also about an assessment of where the country is and what they think they need to regain trust in that country, right? And so knowing that the youth of Kenya now call for the stepping down of the president cast doubt as to the level of trust that they have, not just in the government, but also in the democratic structures and the person at the very top of it. Because mind you, it went from an attack on the Parliament House after they disobeyed or disregarded the calls for people to say, don't vote for the bill, don't pass the bill. It went there because that is the apex of the democracy, the representative house. And then it went to calls to the president. The question I have for you, and I'll start with you, Felix, on this one. How bad is the distrust in the Kenyan government as it stands now?
Thank you, Andres, for the question. I don't even know where to begin with to answer this, because from one point we have leaders who promise us heaven, and once they step into these offices, we see a total shift of their narrative or their manifestos, and they turn to be these liars whenever one speaks up. And I'll be put on record, same as my fellow senior Paul Mwangi, who's an advocate, also mentioned the same. We have a president who, whenever he speaks up to speak to the public, even before he utters a word, people have already started calling him a liar, because that is what we are so used to him lying time and time. Yeah. Any utterances that he makes out in the public is just populist and trying to woo the public and to woo the public into his side. They're more of pedestrian declarations that he makes and dodging out numbers and figures about, we have this number, we have this billions set aside, I've set aside this. And when you go to the actual ground, even the projects that are said to have been launched by him since he joined office in 2022 as the president, there's little to no progress, save for plaques, save for monument. What do we call them? The monuments that you see, this was opened by His Excellency XYZ on this date for this project. That's the only thing that you'll see on the ground. So the dishonesty we have in our leaders is quite high. And it's not only the president, it also bottles down to the senators, the members of parliament, to our county members of county assembly. And it's really sad that we can no longer trust our leaders, yet we give them the mandate to represent us into these offices, just as our constitution gives that provision at Article 1, 2 of the constitution. We give them our direct right for them to represent us, but they end up not being servant leaders, but to be rulers over us.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fascinating point, and I want to sort of narrow this down. All of us probably have the one person that in certain situations you go like, oh, if this person cannot do it, then I probably lose hope. I don't think anyone else can do it, right? And because I was trying to ask, why do people have such an adverse reaction to these issues and that this specific president at this point in time? And it took me back to his campaign message when he was running for president, which is the hustler culture, saying, I came from where you are. Like he said, that he was a chicken farmer. I came from where you are, I understand where you are. And I am telling you, trust me, I am the one who knows exactly what needs to be done to get you, the hustlers, living a better life in Kenya. And the question then is it a matter of Ruto, his identity, what people saw him to be as probably the most non-elite politician, as at the time he was running for president? Literally, the narrative he sold to people is that he's the politician who is not elite. He's not the one coming from the higher class. He's the one who has sat in the gutters with you and is rising up. Is it more of seeing that person that a lot of people went like, he is the one to do it, and if he turns on you, probably there is no one else? Is it more of a situation of saying, if Ruto has turned on us, then there is no hope in democracy anymore? And I don't know whether that's also how you feel, and that's how the Gen Zs feel, Michelle.
Yeah, it's surprising because the people that are suffering the most are the people who gave him votes, and I think that's like for very alarming. Because if you look at the other night, the massacre in Githurai, and you see people spreading videos of the president when he was campaigning in that very place and how much support he got, only for people, troops were sent there and children were killed in the night. It's so surprising that even the bill itself was going to affect mostly the people that gave him votes. So I think for people, there was so much hope in just, first of all, his idea that there's going to be bottom up and no, those at the bottom are now going to see the light. There was also this misconception with our previous presidents that maybe having like political legacies is a problem. We want a new face, someone fresh, someone who has been through what we've been through. And I think just seeing that turn back and, slap us in the face has been very surprising. So I'd say, just a lot of the hope people had in seeing some fresh new blood and new ideas was just changed. Because even the idea of like debt, like his whole campaign was on how taking out loans is bad, and now he's taking out more loans than even the former president that he was criticizing. He just turned on us and everyone was so surprised. And I think it's crazy to the point where just the idea of leadership is so scary. Because the other day, there's a group of people that started calling themselves leaders of the Gen Z, which I don't think there was anything wrong with them as individuals, but everyone, went up in flames like, oh no, we don't have leaders. We are moving, through our own initiative. So people are scared of it. They're scared of power. And I think that's a bit unfortunate,
I think that's even probably more alarming than I thought, because now it's gone from just a skepticism around the democracy to the concept of leadership itself now being unwelcome amongst people. And probably that's a very, very big problem, right? If you have a country where people at all fronts would probably start to oppose the concept of leadership in any form whatsoever, that's a very, very huge problem. There's a saying that has been going around within this period, and I'm directing this to you, Paul, which said that the people didn't turn on him, he turned on the people. Is this the perception amongst people? And is this also the deep-rooted source of the distrust? because I know obviously there's been skepticism around democratic structures across board. Like, yes, maybe some people cheat in elections. Yeah, maybe there's some corruption here and there. But I think the protest we've seen in Kenya goes beyond ordinary skepticism of democracy. It's more of, okay, now enough is enough. This whole system is not working and we need to get rid of it, which evolved into calling for the president to resign. And so do you think that it's more of people feeling that he turned on them and so now it's time for them to pay him back? You just get out of the way.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think something interesting about this is it's largely the country that's disturbed, but it's also very specific demographic. And you see, normally the nature has always been certain groups of people have protest, but this time those groups that typically protest have been at the back end of it. Right? It's been an entirely different group that were disappointed by the man. Now, I'll speak from a very subjective POV, as someone who has seen this for a while. Immediately, Ruto won that election. I did not expect much from the guy because anyone that knows Ruto properly knows Ruto is an excellent politician, but he has almost nothing to show for governance and politics. So, in politics, Ruto has never lost, and his ascent has always been smooth. Like, if you need a man to win you an election, and scrupulously, principled on the side, like, Ruto is your guy. Like, you won't lose. He's very good at, like, this narrative perpetuation and that kind of thing. So, there were a group of people who genuinely believe that, oh, okay, we are done. They are just bracing for the war. And when I talked to a lot of the guys that supported people to our life, he's disappointed us. We thought he'd bring manna from heaven and that kind of thing, as like Adika had said, but that obviously didn't happen because they thought he's like their knight in shining armor, their Messiah that come and liberate them, and that was obviously not true. So I think the turning on people, he has definitely turned on a lot of the people that can support on him, because most of the people that are crying about the implications of this finance are demographics that voted for him overwhelmingly. Most of the people that have died in cold blood are people that voted for him. Kituyi, where there was like a serious massacre, those guys Ruto just walk through because it's a whole market. Ruto will liberate us. We are done with the dynasty because, of course, like Kenyatta was the son of the first Kenyatta, so there was like a whole dynasty thing. And Ruto's opponent Odinga was the son of the first vice president. So like this idea of we want to be liberated, we are stealing money from us, there's no account for our money. He did promise people a lot, but of course, for me personally, I knew it wouldn't happen. I'm just shocked at how quickly it has happened. I even expected it to happen in the second term when he's been re-elected. It's not really soon. So definitely for me, I'm not shocked, but I can empathize with people that put a lot of their hope in him, because clearly you can see the result.
Yeah, thank you very much for that contribution as well. The next question I'm going to ask is probably a little bit more controversial, which is to say, in Africa, there seems to be a recurring issue of we probably ending up just voting for reps of international creditors. So, for instance, a lot of national policy is determined by the people you owe and what like agreements you reach with them, or the people you want to borrow from. So if you take the IMF, for instance, a lot of countries who go to the IMF have to go with some form of revenue mobilization plans. And a lot of the time that pressure dictates certain pattern of financial policies or national policy, right? And so the thing that I'm asking is, even if it wasn't Ruto and you had another person in power, you probably have an issue where they go back to the IMF. There's still a similar proposition, if not the exact proposition, but similar proposition, similar tax levels for the finance bill. For instance, take Ghana, for example, when the current government was coming into power, the campaign was, you can't sustain the government by borrowing, and debt levels was huge. And now the debt levels are through the roof. We've gone to the IMF. In fact, being in the IMF was one of the huge campaigning points. Now the country is back to the IMF and there are a lot of conversations around it. And like I was saying, going to the IMF also triggered a lot of financial decisions that were favorable to the Ghanaian population. There's the famous, what is called electronic levy, e-levy. There were protests about it. There were parliamentary fights about it. Government found whatever ways it could to bail. There have been tax increases almost across board, interest rates increases and all that. And the question you ask is it becoming the issue that in third world countries or in Africa, we just vote for people who eventually get dictated to by the IMF, the World Bank, and that's also causing much more mistrust in whoever we are voting for, because it's more of the people we are voting for don't have the final say. Those who really have the final say, we don't get to vote for them. And is that creating more mistrust within the states that we are living in, Felix?
Thank you, Andres. I think for any leader that we would have gotten from the 2022 general elections, it wouldn't have been any different when it comes to borrowing, since, as I earlier said, countries such as China have reduced their lending to us as a country because of our exposure. Countries such as Great Britain, Germany, Italy, they're pulling back in offering us, or rather lending us money because of our trimmed exposure. And that is one of actually the main reasons that they are declining, the international commercial banks from these countries. Yeah. So we tend to find ourselves in a very precarious position where, to whom shall we go to? And as we all know, IMF is always the point of last resort. And that is where we found ourselves in. Regardless of whoever would have been president, that was the route we would have taken. The issue now would come as, how would we have spent the money, or what would have been our expenditure from borrowing these loans from the IMF and the World Bank? How would it have been spent? That would be the main question. Had we had another leader who's more accountable, as opposed to Ruto, in my opinion, I never voted for the guy. I clearly say this vehemently and blatantly. He was deputy president for 10 years, and there was no single project that you could pinpoint to him actually having developed. He was, for the second term he was in office, he was never present, and we saw the president having to go to seek consolation from his main opponent, who's Raila Odinga, to help him support and move the government to actually work, make the government actually work. So this is someone who tell his lies throughout his campaign is going to bring the economy from bottom going up. But there's this analogy, who surprisingly is the current prime cabinet secretary. He took a bottle in the public and says, if you're drinking this bottle of water, the bottom, when you drink, comes up. So when he says he's doing a bottom-up kind of economics, and if you take the analogy of drinking water, by the end of the day, all the water would have been going up and the bottom will be empty. And that is where we find ourselves at the moment. It's sad, it's disheartening. Poor governance, we are wasteful with our resources. As I earlier mentioned, we have illegitimate and illegal offices that the president still allows to date, but they're heavily funded. And Michelle pointed out, we have, in the rejected now finance bill, we had 880 million shillings being awarded as confidential, and confidential means it's not going to be audited. Our Auditor General comes out and says the housing levy that was collected last year, we cannot account for 15.5 billion shillings. That's a lot of money. We don't have money to pay intern doctors, yet we have money to be wasteful and spend 15.5 billion. For me to even narrow it down to you, to narrow it down, just 1 billion shillings, if you spend it for 50 years, each day would amount to 55,000 Kenya shillings and some change. Every day you have 55,000 Kenya shillings for just a single individual. So you can imagine what 15.5 billion will do. You can imagine what this 880 million will do. You can imagine what the money that was designated for the spousal, the first lady and second lady, and also the office of the wife to the prime cabinet secretary. That's wastefulness. And we find ourselves into this position, just as Paul had actually earlier mentioned. We are overrepresented, and that increases our tax burden. And at the end of the day, it does not become sustainable for us.
Yeah. how bad is the perception of neocolonialism in Kenya? I currently don't know exactly how the terrain looks like, but how bad is it, and how is it leaking into the perceptions of trust or mistrust within the democratic structure? Michelle?
It's definitely not good. We obviously learn about it in school when we are growing up, but also when the finance bill conversation was going on, a lot of questions were coming up. So many people thought that the IMF goes through the bill. People found it a bit strange that US representatives were present in parliament during discussions of the bill, which was a bit weird because they're definitely not benchmarking with Kenya. So it's not really clear what's going on there. So people definitely are afraid, which is why I think some different groups were trying to even see how we can go protest outside the US embassy and kick these people out. So people are scared. And I think it's definitely like clear that we do need this money. So I don't think the problem is really these institutions or the fact that they're giving us money. I think it's the people that are like at the table with them when having discussions and whether they actually represent our interests, whether they actually voice what we would want, provisions that we care about and provisions that we don't. Like if the government was a bit more clear with Kenyan citizens that this is the crisis we are in, these are the problems we are facing, this is how we are channeling funds to just deal with that problem, then I think people might have a bit more confidence that we are taking this money for the right reasons and maybe things are being increased to ensure we can pay the debt that we have and we can take more money to have in this project and this project that will have given results for the citizens. So we know there's problems. I think it's just the government hasn't been transparent with how they are dealing with these problems and maybe even how these institutions have been beneficial if they have, how that money has gone into doing things that Kenyan citizens genuinely care about. As of now, see people are definitely scared and definitely see them as the enemy. Yeah.
Paul, I'm actually coming to you on this one in terms of if people are feeling the panic and the agitation. I mean, you can contribute to your thoughts on whether or not, or the feelings of people on this in terms of the perception of neocolonialism and how that's affecting the trust in the system. But then what I want you to also try and answer is, how do you think the way out of this should be, right? Because trust in democracy is almost, or trust in the institutions of governance is very fundamental to the sustainability and the survival of the country. And so to have the increasing mistrust is very, very dangerous as a path to tread on, especially in a slightly volatile state of protests, distrust within the country, economic hardship. If you have those situations, the worst thing you would want is anything that's likely to topple over the things that keep people at bay, or let's use democratic means to try and solve this, right? So how do you think we can deal with this? But also your initial assessment on how bad neocolonialism looks like.
Okay, so I think I'll start with the latter on colonialism, follow up on Adika. I think a lot of who the president has been speaking by is not doing him any favors, at least in favor of the public. So, for example, Ruto had a 3-day state visit to the US, full convoy. They received him in many places. He was even to address Congress, but I think the current speaker refused. He's been to G7 meetings. Those they're what many will call imperialists, but let's just call them like a lot of the global powers. He's addressed them on what democracy looks like and how Kenya is enforcing democracy. He's addressed the EU. He's gone to France. He's given a speech in front of the Eiffel Tower, and people have cheered him on. And like Macron wants to shake his hand and that kind of thing. So even optically, even if at best nothing was done, those things are not doing him any favors. And that will inform your second question. The first step will be, because there is a growing narrative and people are getting more awake as to what the West does. Like maybe 10 years ago, going back, Western culture and countries are always idealized and that kind of thing. They're good, they help people and that kind of thing. lately there's been a reawakening on how they actually pillage these countries, even covertly, even through aid, how they trap the countries through aid. So with that awakening, I think then the first thing will be to like sever a lot of their ties with these guys, because I don't think it does them any good. So secondly, a certain mechanism. There was one that had started under President Kenyatta's side. One on things like lifestyle audits and that kind of thing. Should be like a regular thing. Public servants should be able to scrutinize for a lot of these things. They are very independent bodies. I think that will go a long way. And generally, address cases of rigging elections, especially with the IBC, the independent body, so there's been compromised. From the get-go, people, before a president is even sworn in, people already think the president was rigged. I think that causes a lot of apathy in terms of how you react to what your government tells you. And even if they probably bring in something like no, they are rigged, they legitimate, so probably don't have to listen to anything they have. So majorly a lot of it. And I think it is the first step of a series of staircases to overcome. But definitely a good start. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's go to you, Felix, and then I'll wrap up with Michelle on this last part of the conversation. Like, what do you think we should do about this? I keep on asking what do you think we should do, because I also know that we are a bunch of people who tend to dwell a lot more on criticizing and probably share less ideas on what should be done. And I think even if not for us being in positions to actually do something, putting out our thoughts and ideas to inform a lot more people about what could be done is a very, very helpful thing in starting the conversation and also sustaining it. So with these issues that they've highlighted in terms of neocolonialism as well, what do you think can be done to try and at least tone down these sentiments and then restore much more trust in the system?
Thank you, Andrews. Before I answer that, I would just like to bring to the attention of Michelle and Paul and yourself as well, and also people who will be listening to us. As of this morning, one of the things we have been doing as the advocates in Kenya, we petitioned the High Court, and as of this morning, on the 28th, at around 11, the High Court issued a ruling and issued an order and barred police from using water cannons, tear gas, live ammunition, rubber bullets, and other crude weapons or draconian measures, and from deploying brute force or any form of violence, or committing any extrajudicial killings, arrests, abductions, detentions, harassment, intimidation, torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment against peaceful protesters. Yeah. This is one of the things that we can be doing, that we are doing as active citizenry. We are going out there, putting these institutions to book. The National Police Service is an institution that is constitutionally mandated to protect the people of the Republic and not to harm. That is one arm. When it comes to such international, let's say the examples of the IMF and the World Bank, international financial institutions, when it comes to lending, what can we do to prevent this? You'd be shocked that the IMF knew and gave a warning to the president that him imposing these taxes on us, it was in our local dailies as yesterday, him imposing these taxes on us will create a backlash and a fallout with the citizens, but do it anyway. And that is the key point, do it anyway. Yeah. Yet they already have intel that us having been imposed these taxes, and as Michelle said, we had guys from the IMF, from the World Bank, and other international communities being present in a parliamentary sitting, yet they have no interest of business being present to it. That shows the amount of control they have towards such policy measures. For instance, I would not be surprised that the package that we receive, the second package that we'll be receiving from the IMF, which is around $1.2 billion, which will amount to a good significant number of trillions of shillings for the Kenyan economy. However, it comes with a clawback effect whereby we have to concede to these measures. Yeah. And that is the modern day neocolonialism that we need to shy away from, and we need to abscond it in totality and have that freedom. The best way moving forward is us as a country having good manners, having self-discipline, from the apex, that is the president, and also his advisors, which is who are the executive, and creating room for there to be a separation of powers and not having a super legislator who's the president, because now he's already created precedence of there being a threat where he directs. The mandate of the president is to receive a bill, assent or not. If not, he gives his reservations through a memorandum and sends it back to parliament for consideration. But we see a situation where the president stands and actually dictates what should happen. And the deputy president comes later on in a presser and gives a presser that do not bash your members of parliament. It was a political party's stand. And we know you elected them to represent you, but they come from a political party, and thus they should toe the line of the political party. So you are left to wonder, whose interests should be served? Is it the people who elected them, or is it the political party? So you get the conflict and the contrast. So only if we can have good governance, self-discipline, or personal discipline when office holders take up a public office. We have a whole chapter in the Constitution, Chapter 6, Leadership and Integrity. Were we to actually exercise it in totality from article to article in Chapter 6, most of the leaders we have will not meet that threshold. I think it's about time where if we can put these legislators, these public office holders to book and actually conform with Article 6, Chapter 6 of our Constitution, then we'll be a step closer to finishing off neocolonialism.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that as well. Finally, to you, Michelle, how do we fix neocolonialism and restore trust in the system?
One of the things I'd recommend is also part of what Felix has discussed, which is something I've always been proud of. Just studying law for the few years that I have, I think our courts have been very active, and we have a very good constitution, especially Chapter 6, which I think is unique to our constitution in terms of just the qualities of good governance. So I think ensuring a lot of these things are enforced and just ensuring our courts are doing a lot more, because even when all of this was going on, the Chief Justice had said that they'd be willing to listen to any matters in regards to the protests, people that are arrested wrongly, and they'd be willing to work over hours to do this. The orders that Felix has told us have been given by the High Court, and also just previous actions by the courts in general, reversing elections and all of that. I think our courts are doing amazing, and I think they just need to keep at it, because I think on paper, our constitution is great, and if it's implemented, I think our country will probably improve and grow and all of that. The second is, I think as a society, we need to recognize that we have our voice. I think for the longest, we had been a bit scared of what the government would do. Maybe like our president is going to clap back and people are going to face harm and all of that. It's true that a lot of loss occurred, but it's also true that our voices eventually resulted in the bill being withdrawn, which is something that I think is beneficial. So I think we need to realize that we have our voice, and we have tools at our disposal to help us, disseminate these voices, because social media played a huge role in the revolution that happened, and I think we need to recognize that these tools are important. In terms of allowing us to break down information, allowing us to mobilize, because people raised, I think, about 4 million just to help those who are arrested, or I think the other day or something. So I think we have resources, we have things that we can use just to ensure that we are pushing the government. So I think we need to keep doing that. The last thing for me is, I don't think this should end here. I think 2027, especially Generation Z, the millennials, we were one of the largest groups that didn't vote last time. So I think people need to show up to the polls and actually have these voices make tangible decisions in the people that we have in power, but also not just vote blindly, because we criticize the previous the generation before us for making tribal decisions, or voting out of popularity, or just voting because, this is the political party I know, so this person must be a great person. So actually reading a lot of the proposals that they have, asking them, how are you going to do this? If it's bottom up, where are you getting the money? How is this happening? Asking questions and trying to actually break down and read these things like we did with the finance bill. I think that will allow people informed decisions and hopefully restore the trust that's needed in institutions, because leadership is necessary. I just think it needs to be done well. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that as well. I mean, that pretty sums up a position I've held on politics in Africa for a long time, that we tend to run the politics of ideas in Africa, and it's a very bad brand of politics where we just share ideas and people rally around the ideas and have their own interpretations of what those ideas would look like in their head, up until we see an implementation of it in real life. And then we start realizing, hold on, no, actually wasn't what we were thinking, right? And so, like you said, there should be some more probe into the practical levels of policy ideas. What are they going to look like? What is it going to take? At what cost are these things going to be in effect? This has been a really, really insightful conversations. I probably came here knowing little. After this conversation, I know a lot more. I can brag and boast to anyone I have a conversation with about Kenya now that I know a lot about Kenyan politics. And this episode has been really insightful as well, right from the start where we spoke about the protest to the debt sustainability issues, and then now on the democratic trust and the ability to try and restore trust within the system. My three guests have been Michelle Adika, who is a senior editor of the Strathmore Law Review Journal, Paul Kituyi, who is a law student and an enthusiast of debate, and finally, we were joined by Nyabuto Nyachio, who is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. It's been a really, really insightful conversation with you all. Thank you very much for joining me on the Shaft podcast. And thank you also to our listeners for joining in. Share these with people, get them informed about the Kenyan situation. Probably think this is one of the most comprehensive discussions you would see out there around the issues that are happening in Kenya as well. And so this would be a good resource to share with anyone you want to get informed about the issues. Thanks very much, and see you on the next episode. Bye.